Welcome back to my channel if you have been here before, and welcome if you haven't. Today is the 24th of March 2026, and I just wanted to make a small video about ketone meters and glucose meters because I have been using a breath meter for a fairly long time, about the whole last year more or less, on and off I was using it, but it turned out to be fairly unreliable. So about 6 months ago I started using the ketones, this one here, which has been much more reliable, but it's a fairly expensive one to use to measure the blood ketones, so it's not something that I can afford to do every day. But about a month and a half ago, I realized that the ketones does only tell one part of the story. So while they do say that if your ketone level is between 0.5 and 2.0, you are in a good healthy ketosis where you have the possibility of doing weight loss. And if you got above that, that is good. If you're above 3.0, then you are what you call in medicinal ketosis. Then that is the truth with modification, I realized, because there's something else that is important to look at, and that is the glucose levels in your blood. So about a month ago, I bought another one of these. This is actually a double one, so you can do both things, but I haven't figured out how to switch between the two things, and I don't want to mess up the settings that I have right now, which works very, very nice when it comes to ketones. So for very small money, I bought another one. I think it's like $10 for a glucose meter with 150 strips or 100 strips. Yeah, 100 strips, I think it is. So, and I took that, and that's because you want to know how much glucose you got floating in your bloodstream in reality in order to figure out what your glucose ketone index is. And you get your glucose ketone index by taking your glucose number and divide it with your ketone number. Now, some of these glucose meters, they have it in mmLs or some in mLs, and depending on what you have, and I've got the one in mmLs, I have to divide that number with 18 before I divide it with the ketone number. And my glucose numbers are hovering these days at about 115 to 122, and it's supposed to be between 70 and 99 in order to be in the good levels if you're in a healthy ketosis. And this is important because I can have a ketone level who says 0.5, but because I have a glucose index, glucose number, which is at 115, 120, say, then my actual glucose ketone index number becomes somewhere between 12 and 20. Now, I can't do the math in my head here. I'm just saying it's going to be more than the 3 to 9, which is the sweet spot if you want to be in a healthy ketosis for weight loss. So while the ketone number can say, oh, you are right there, you are at 0.5 or 0.6, then depending on your glucose numbers, then you will actually not be there, really. I will get up so many readings where I was in healthy ketosis until I saw the glucose ketone index, then it was at 12 or 15 or so, which is well beyond the 9, which is the maximum. So if you are interested in these numbers, I can highly recommend that you make sure you combine them with the glucose numbers to get your glucose ketone index, the GKI, because that's the only way you really know how to do it. And a little bit of extra information. If you're doing your measurement as I did previously, as the first thing I did in the morning, because that was a good consistent way of doing it, because you also want to do it before you eat or drink anything apart from obviously water. And because I do enjoy my morning coffee with my Kokyo and all that, then I do not want to postpone that. So I did my readings in the morning. But then I realized that just before you wake up, your body will produce cortisol. And that is a kind of a biological mechanism to make sure that you go from that dormant state until waking up and being more active. And then in order to provide the body with more emergent energy, then the body creates cortisol, and cortisol in turn releases sugar in your bloodstream, which means that you get an elevated glucose numbers is the first thing you do when you wake up. You're taking that measurement. And it also means that you will have a lower ketone numbers if you're measuring right out of the bed. So what you want to do is you want to wait somewhere between 1 and 3 hours without having anything but, let's just say, water. And then after that, you will measure it and you'll have a more realistic reading of your glucose levels and ketone levels. And I did some testing on that, and it seems to be quite consistent, being 0.3 higher if you're waiting at least 1 hour to do your ketone levels rather than doing it right away. Now, depending on what you're doing, before you do the readings after you get up, then you might have a higher reading on glucose levels, which I've had because I thought I would spend 1 hour walking, doing my 3 or 5 kilometers morning walk before I do the test, because then I had something to do and just sitting around doing nothing, feeling hungry and feeling thirsty for my coffee. But when you're doing that, you have a higher adrenaline going on, and in turn you also have a higher glucose levels because your cortisol level increases, and that will also skew your readings. So what you really want to do is just having whatever quiet morning routine. That could be meditations, or do a little bit of computer work, whatever you got to do for that first hour, and then do the measurements, and then you'll have a higher ketosis level reading, and you'll have a lower glucose reading, which in turn means you will have a more realistic glucose ketone index reading. So yeah, there was new information for me. I've been at this for so long, and every time I find something new, I thought I would share it, because if it's new to me, I bet you it is new for a lot of people watching these videos, which is quite funny because at the point of this video, I have an average of about 10 views per video. So I do not know if it's actually that many of you who are unknown to this. But now you know. Until next time, stay happy and healthy.